Ever get those, like, those weird vibes looking back at old PSAs,
Yeah.
like the ones warning about all the dangers lurking around every corner?
Yeah, totally. They always seemed a bit over the top.
Well, imagine that, but in the 1980s.
Yeah.
Except, instead of drugs or stranger danger, the big threat was, wait for it, your kid's D&D set.
Dice, character sheets, the whole shebang.
Yeah,
Yeah.
seriously. And we're not talking some niche fear either. For a lot of parents, Dungeons & Dragons wasn't just a game, it was like a gateway to something truly sinister.
Straight to the devil, some folks thought.
It's wild. And you know what's even wilder? You sent us this audio discussion about how the Satanic Panic, like, completely latched onto D&D.
Oh yeah, that audio is a trip.
It's like a time capsule of all these cultural anxieties, right? We're talking tragic suicides, media frenzy, and even how the game's own popularity might have been its saving grace.
Fascinating stuff. We should unpack that.
Totally. But before we, like, descend into this dungeon of a story, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we should make sure everyone's on the same page about what D&D even is.
Good point. Some folks listening might still picture, I don't know, hooded figures chanting in a basement or something.
Exactly. So picture this instead. You're with some friends, gathered around a table, no Ouija board, but maybe some pizza. The key is you're creating a story together.
Collaborative storytelling. That's the heart of it.
Right. So each player makes a character, not just like what they look like, but their skills, their flaws, their whole personality.
You really built them out. It's cool.
And then there's the dungeon master, the DM. They're kind of like a referee and a narrator all in one. They describe the world, the challenges, you know how your choices play out?
It's their world. You're just living in it.
Exactly. And instead of moving pieces on a board, you'd use dice.
But not just your normal six-siders?
Oh, no. D&D's got a whole set. Different ones for different things.
Like whether your sword hits or your spell, fizzles out.
And which dice you roll depends on your character, right? Like how strong they are, how smart, and of course what the DM throws at you.
Makes it exciting.
Yeah.
Never know what'll happen next.
And here's the thing. Those character abilities, they aren't just fixed. They change as you play.
Level up. Get better at stuff.
It's like your character's literally growing and improving alongside you.
Reflecting the choices you make is pretty neat.
So like one group's D&D might be all about combat, right? Figuring out the best moves to take down a monster.
Totally. Tactics and all that.
But another group, they might be more into the role-playing. How their characters react, their relationships, the whole drama of it.
It's versatile like that. Fits different personalities.
Which I guess in the context of the Satanic Panic made it seem like this, I don't know, unpredictable force. If adults didn't understand the game, they couldn't control what was happening in those imaginations.
Yeah, a total wild card. And that fear, unfortunately, it found a tragic focus in the case of James Dallas Egbert III.
Oh, man. This is where things take a dark turn.
Yeah.
Egbert was this brilliant kid, right? He was in college at 16, but then he vanished from his dorm in 1979.
Just gone. Poof.
And a private investigator, Bill Deere, was brought in to find him.
To try and figure out what happened, yeah.
Now, Egbert was known to play D&D, and of course, the media, they jumped all over that angle.
It was sensational.
And Deere, whether he meant to or not, he kind of fed into that frenzy, didn't he?
To some degree. It's hard to say how much was intentional, how much was just, I don't know, the pressure of the moment.
So the story became that Egbert had gotten so lost in the game that he had actually gone into the steam tunnels under the university, like trying to live out his fantasy.
Like he'd crossed over somehow.
Hold on, why would he push that narrative? Was he really convinced about the D&D link, or was it just a way to get headlines?
Tough to say for sure. Deere's book about the case, The Dungeon Master, it does push the D&D narrative. But there are these hints about other stuff going on in Egbert's life. Stuff he kind of kept out of the media spotlight initially.
Like what?
Possible drug use, maybe struggling with his sexuality, things that were way harder to talk about openly back then.
So D&D was kind of the scapegoat, the easy villain in a story that was probably way more complicated.
It's possible, yeah. Sadly, even though Egbert was eventually found alive, the association with his disappearance and then his suicide in 1980, it just cemented the idea that D&D was dangerous.
And of course, Hollywood couldn't resist a story like that. You had the 1981 novel Mazes and Monsters, which was then turned into a movie with Tom Hanks. Didn't exactly help, did it?
Oh, no. It added fuel to the fire, for sure. Wow. Entertaining, yeah. But they took that kernel of fear and blew it up into a full-blown panic. Like D&D was driving people mad, blurring the lines between fantasy and reality.
It's crazy to think this is all happening as D&D is getting more and more popular. It's like the controversy is feeding the beast.
And then you have Pat Pulling, a grieving mother who became, well, a central figure in this whole D&D panic. She took that fear from like
Yeah.
a whisper to a roar, you know?
This is where things get organized. Polling founded Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons, or BAD, after her son, Irving, died by suicide in 1982.
And she was convinced D&D was to blame, dedicated herself to warning everyone about its supposed dangers.
And she didn't just stick to concerned parents, right?
No, she went after law enforcement too. Gave seminars to police departments, teaching them to see D&D as a sign of potential criminal behavior or, suicidal tendencies.
Wait, are you serious? Cops were being told to look for, the Dungeon Master's Guide at crime scenes?
Unfortunately, yeah. And that misinformation, it landed on fertile ground. The satanic panic was in full swing. The media, especially shows like 60 Minutes, they gave Pulling's claims a huge platform, often without questioning the lack of evidence.
It's like a textbook case of how media can amplify a moral panic, even if they don't mean to, just by giving airtime to unsubstantiated claims, especially when they tap into those pre-existing anxieties.
Absolutely. And Pulling, she went even further. She created a profile of the typical D&D player. It's so broad and stereotypical, it's almost funny now.
Oh, I gotta hear this. What kind of kid was supposedly prime D&D-induced devil worshiper material?
Okay, get ready. According to Pulling, your typical D&D player is usually very intelligent, creative, imaginative, adventurous, academically interested in history or computer science, with a high math aptitude, and an interest in drama.
Wait, that actually sounds kind of good.
Physically, either fairly slight build, clean cut, or possibly overweight and sloppy appearance. Usually socioeconomically from a middle to upper middle class family. Generally, the adolescent D&D player is not involved with drugs. Adolescents who become heavily involved generally are, quote, good kids with no prior behavioral problems.
So basically, any kid who likes to read, has an imagination, maybe isn't a star athlete, that's suspect. It's like they took all the positive traits and twisted them into something sinister.
Pretty much. Classic example of how moral panics often target folks who are seen as different, who challenge the norm.
It's mind-blowing. But here's the thing, right? While all this is going on, D&D's booming. They have the novels, the cartoons, the merchandise. It's kind of ironic, right? A game that's supposedly leading kids to the devil is also a massive commercial success.
It is. And that's where capitalism's, its double-edged sword comes into play. The very popularity that made D&D a target might have also been its saving grace.
Because kids were buying it, parents were buying it, someone was making a lot of money.
Exactly. Unlike individuals or small groups that were targeted during the Satanic Panic, D&D had big companies behind it. TSR, the publisher back then, they had resources to fight back.
So how did they do that? What were their strategies? They hired lawyers to challenge all those lawsuits. They issued these public statements, to counter all the misinformation out there.
And they even, worked with some media outlets to kind of try to present a more balanced view of the game.
Smart. So it wasn't purely altruistic, right? Protecting their bottom line was a big factor.
For sure. Profit was a huge motivator. But at the same time, those actions helped to shield D&D, kept it from getting completely crushed by the panic.
So the Satanic Panic, in this weird roundabout way, kind of gave D&D a ton of free publicity.
Absolutely.
It became like this forbidden fruit.
Yeah.
Which made it even more appealing to the kids who were already drawn to that rebellious kind of image.
You can't tell someone they can't have something,
Yeah.
Makes them want it even more.
Totally. It's like the ultimate Streisand effect.
Trying to suppress something just makes it more popular. Especially with a generation like Gen X, they were primed to question authority anyway.
So true. This whole story, it's really a reflection of all the anxieties of that time, isn't it? The fear of the unknown, the distrust of anything outside the mainstream, trying to understand this changing youth culture.
Yeah, the world was changing. People were scared.
And underneath it all, there's this deeper fear, a fear of imagination itself. D&D at its core, it's about creativity, about problem solving. It's collaborative storytelling.
Which can be scary to some people.
Right. And in a society that's increasingly focused on control, conformity, consumerism, those values, they could be seen as kind of a threat.
Like, what if kids started imagining worlds where they don't need the things we're trying to sell them, right? What if they started questioning all the narratives that we're feeding them?
That is a fascinating thought. That the Satanic Panic, at least in part, was like a backlash against the power of imagination and the potential for young people to create their own meaning their own values.
Yeah, that's heavy stuff. It's something to think about for sure.
Definitely. Especially as we keep navigating these new technologies, new forms of entertainment, stuff that challenges those traditional norms and values.
Always pushing those
That's
boundaries.
powerful. So how did D&D weather this storm
Hmm.
and become the phenomenon it is today? We'll get into that after the break. We've talked about how the Satanic Panic rose and fell and all that, but what about like the lasting impact?
Yeah.
Did it change how we see games now?
Huh.
Or even just the idea of letting kids, use their imaginations?
It's complicated, right? The Satanic Panic's legacy. On the one hand, it's like a cautionary tale about how dangerous misinformation can be, how easily fear gets manipulated, especially when it plays on those deep societal anxieties we all have.
And we still see that today, don't we?
Yeah.
With all the new tech, new ways to entertain ourselves, there's always that knee-jerk reaction to label it as dangerous or corrupting or whatever.
For sure. Video games, social media, certain types of music, it's like clockwork. We're uncomfortable with change, so we look for a scapegoat.
But on the flip side, the fact that D&D survived, and not just survived, but thrived, it suggests something else too, right?
Definitely.
Like a resilience,
Yeah.
maybe even a growing awareness that imagination isn't something to be afraid of.
Yeah, it pushed back against that whole idea that there's only one right way to do things, one right way to play, one right way to be a kid.
To express yourself.
Yeah.
And the way TSR, the company behind D&D, the way they fought back against those accusations, it's important too. It set a precedent for how to defend creative freedom.
Definitely. They didn't just hunker down and wait for it to blow over. They challenged the lies, engaged with the media, really helped shift the public's perception.
It's a lesson we can still use today. Whenever we see those moral panics bubbling up, whether it's about a game or a book or a whole community, we got to push back.
It's crucial.
And it's bigger than just defending one hobby or whatever.
It's about defending the right to imagine, to create, to explore new ways of thinking, of being.
Because that's really what D&D is all about, isn't it? The power of imagination to, transport us, to connect us, even to help us understand the world,
Powerful stuff. And that's something worth fighting for, even if it means facing down a few imaginary demons along the way.
Love that. Well, this has been such a fascinating trip, right? Back to this time when dice were practically demonic and imagination was on trial. Thanks for diving deep with us into the world of D&D and the Satanic Panic.
My pleasure. It's been a great conversation.
And to all our listeners out there, we'd love to hear from you. Did you live through the Satanic Panic? Ever rolled a 20-sided die yourself? Share your stories on social media. And until next time, keep those imaginations rolling.